Before we begin, I wanted to mention that my capstone touches on topics such as suicide and self-harm. Your discretion is advised. In 2014, I was diagnosed with ADHD. You probably now have a few assumptions about me just based off my disorder and the stereotype associated with it. I've found over the years that no matter how much I explain to people what ADHD actually is, there will always be that base stereotype of you can't focus or you have too much energy, which I'm not saying it isn't true, but it's still a stereotype. I've had people assume that I do badly in school because of it, among other things, as well as that I have anger issues, along with many other things. I was and still am frustrated with that, and I wondered what other things this applied to. How being labeled as different changes the way neurodiverse people interact with the world and communicate with others, despite the world's view of them being influenced by misconceptions, stereotypes, and ignorance. Hello, my name is Elise Helps, and my capstone question is, how does the stigma around mental health affect the way we communicate? Before we can understand how stigma affects mental health and communication, we first need to address what both those things are. When you hear the words mental health, your mind probably goes straight to the disorders that are more commonly talked about, like autism, ADHD, anxiety, and depression. You factor in communication as people talking about these things, be it talking to you or otherwise. But under both of those terms, there are many different meanings. The definition of mental health on Google is described as the following. Mental illness, also called mental health disorders, refers to a wide range of mental health conditions, disorders that affect your mood, thinking, and behavior. Meaning, on the scientific and medical side of things, it is a literal hormonal and chemical imbalance in your brain. In the US, there's been testing around using brain scans to diagnose autism, which further shows that a lot of disorders are also a physical affliction. Disorders like ADHD and autism are things you are born with, and can sometimes be hereditary, which means they're passed down through genetics. Like how my grandfather has ADHD, which means my mother has ADHD, which means I have ADHD, which also means my little brother has ADHD. It's a really fun family dynamic. But as I was saying, you are born with ADHD or autism. So far, there's no evidence of people developing it later in life. Things like anxiety and depression are different though, as you can be born with it or develop it through traumatic experiences. Communication is the act of expressing yourself to others through many different medias, but what is most common is through words of speech, though people do communicate through the arts such as visual art, music, dance, or acting, and still others. It is less common than just plain old talking. When I talk about communication in this instance, I mean it in two specific ways. One being the way we communicate with others in social situations through conversation, and the way we communicate both our emotional and physical health through body language. Meaning more simply, how would you ask for help if you were struggling emotionally? Would you say something, write something, maybe you act differently, or maybe, and this is what my studies have shown most commonly, maybe you don't show it at all. The question is why? If you were struggling and needed help, why wouldn't you ask? This leads us to my main question. Studies have shown that out of 56 children and adolescents with mental health difficulties, 62% of them experienced stigma from their peers, which resulted in loss of friendships. 42% experienced it from family members, often in the form of unwarranted assumptions, distrust, avoidance, pity, and gossip. And 35% experienced it from teachers in forms of fear, dislike, avoidance, and underestimation of their abilities. Studies also show that 1 in 10 children suffer from mental health difficulties at any given time, yet less than 1/3 seek treatment. Let's put that into a better perspective. This theater seats just under 350 people. But for math's sake, let's say 350 total. If at least 1 in every 10 people struggles with mental health, we can say there would be at least 35 people in here who struggle with mental health. That's more than a class worth. Only around 11 of those people will seek out the help that they need. Again, the question is, why aren't people seeking help? The most common answer is because they're afraid of judgment and afraid of being scrutinized. I took a survey of 30 students here, and when asked the question, do you think people would judge you if they knew you struggled with mental health? 56% of people said yes. People are scared to reach out because vulnerability is something they're ashamed for. When asked how it affects them, one told me they refrained from reaching out because they were scared nothing would be done or that it'd make things worse for them. And others said they were worried it'd change people's perspective of them, that it'd make them seem weak. It stood out to me, someone who I saw as a strong person worried about seeming weak. It made me think about how common it is nowadays to belittle others over mental health. Now a common insult is to call someone autistic as if that means something negative, but if you call it out and ask them why they use it as an insult, they'll either say they don't know or blame you for reading into it too much. This is where it gets hard, because what are you supposed to do when faced with that? So commonly in our society we put down those who are struggling. I've scrolled through comments on mental health videos that address very serious topics, and for every person sharing a story or expressing support, there's 5 people telling them to shut up because nobody cares. People internalize that fear. We see discrimination happen and worry that it'll happen to us, so we stay silent no matter how much we are told it'd be okay. And that's a huge problem for our society because the lack of education and support around these topics is killing people. That is why I wanted to talk about this. People so commonly hide their struggles and problems, especially people in our age range, so much so that the second leading cause of death in people aged 15 to 24 after accidents, which is labeled as any unintentional injury, is suicide. In 2018, the leading cause of death in Canada for children aged 10 to 14 was suicide, which means back in 2018, most of the people in this room were more likely to kill themselves than they were to get hit by a car. And I'm not saying that everybody who has issues with mental health cannot talk about it, or that everyone who struggles with mental health will commit suicide. What I am saying is that the statistics show that if this room holds 350 people, at least one of us will attempt suicide within the next year, and at least one of us will commit self-harm. What I'm saying is that the statistics show that people who struggle with mental health are at a higher risk than those who don't. Autistic people are 9 times more likely to commit suicide, and people with ADHD are 2 times more likely. What I'm saying is that we are so ignorant to these issues that 4,500 Canadians die every year due to suicide, and a quarter of them are within our age group. These deaths are perpetuated by the fear of being judged, overwhelming a person's need for support. Because of the stereotypes surrounding the words mental health, people are dying. Statistically, 1 person in this room will attempt suicide within the next year. Look at yourself, your friends, and the people sitting around you. It could be any of us. And if it is you, I ask you to please seek help from one of the helplines provided at the end, and to tell somebody that you trust. Mental health is a serious topic that is not often taken seriously due to the circumstances and misconceptions surrounding it. And it is killing us. Our duty as a society is this: to check in with people regularly. Just because they can't ask for help doesn't mean you can't offer it to them. It might just be exactly what they need. Whether it's a "hey, how are you doing?" or a deep conversation, the point is that you open the door for them. 2, when you or someone you care about struggles, it's your duty to have at least some understanding of it, whether that means you read an article on it, or if you ask them questions about it. It doesn't matter, as long as you do understand. And 3, to take care of yourself first. Everyone has heard the saying, put your oxygen mask on first. And that's absolutely true in this case. You cannot help somebody swim if you are drowning. I repeat, you cannot help someone swim if you are also drowning. All you will do is drag you both under. So if you're struggling, get help for yourself first before you try to help others. With that, I thank you for listening. And if you or anyone else is struggling, please reach out to somebody that you trust or use one of these helplines.